Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. Brian LaRoche from CallMiner. I'm going to be your producer, if you will, for today's event. We'll be starting our webinar in approximately 1 minute. All right, then, I show 101, so let's get going. Today's webinar, Top 5 Ways to Improve Customer Experience with Speech Analytics, is brought to you by Aspect and CallMiner. Aspect and CallMiner are partners in customer experience optimization solutions. Now, before we begin today's webinar, I'd just like to go through a few logistics with you, if you wouldn't mind. The first is this webcast is a listen-only presentation. So it's a voice over IP presentation that you need to use the audio from your computer system in order to enjoy. If you would like to ask a question, however, we do encourage you to do so, and you can use the Ask a Question widget that you see in your left-hand corner there on the sidebar. We'll try to answer those questions during the Q&A session if we have enough time to get through all of those. And then we will make sure that you will have copies of the webcast as well as the slide decks will be available at the Aspect website within 48 hours of the presentation today. So without any further ado, I am going to hand the presentation over to Richard Gregory of Aspect and Frank Sherlock of CallMiner to take us through the top 5 ways to improve customer experience with speech analytics. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Gregory, a senior account executive at Aspect with over 20 years of enterprise voice, 15 years of contact center, and 6 years of speech analytics experience. So I guess that makes me some kind of veteran in this space. My focus is to assist organizations to provide exceptional customer service to their customers, primarily through the use of advanced customer engagement applications. So when Frank and CallMiner asked me to support this webinar, I jumped at the chance, as I find this technology really interesting and compelling, primarily because speech analytics offers huge opportunities to gain business insight, improve operational efficiency, and develop agent performance. So that's a bit about me. Frank, I wonder if you just would like to give a brief summary of yourself.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I saw from the list of registrants we've got a rich mix of verticals and organization sizes, and I really appreciate everyone taking time to listen to us today. As Richard said, I'm Frank Sherlock. I'm the General Manager for CallMiner's EMEA business. I spend a lot of my time with partners such as Aspect, helping them to help their customers optimize their investments they've already made in Aspect's leading contact center solutions. And apologies for the technical issues we had on Thursday. I was somewhat reassured last night when I was watching Sports Personality of the Year, and they tried to go over to Mo Farah, who won the award, and even the BBC with 9 million expectant viewers also had some technology problems. So I'm going to walk you through speech analytics and how it works, and then I'll discuss the 5 ways in which it can improve the customer experience. But before I do that, I think, Richard, you've got some general thoughts on the agenda and some interesting thoughts around customer experience. So I'll hand you back to Richard, and I'll speak to everybody in a few moments' time.
I have. Thanks, Frank. So if we just consider the agenda, I'll be covering off sort of items 1 and 2 here. As Frank states, he'll then dive a little bit deeper into the sort of technology itself, returning back to me for some positioning. Then I'll just round up with some summarization, and then we'll, if we get time, as Brian has suggested, we'll close and open up the floor for some questions. Okay, so hopefully that's acceptable for everybody. Okay, so customer experience matters. The world we live in, of course, you know it does. You know, I'm preaching to the converted here, but the evidence isn't just anecdotal. It's also in the numbers. And here are some interesting stats from numerous research companies and analysts. For me, the most significant on here, and it may be just the way that you know, my mind works, but you know, the 70% of buying experiences based on how customers feel they are treated. I think that's pretty significant. If I take my own view as a consumer, you know, I know that I'll remember how well I've been treated, whether you know, it was a good or a bad experience. We know that customer expectations are changing rapidly, and customers now are routinely now using more communication channels, should I say, than ever before. You know, it's not just the phone now. They're using such things as social media, so it's easier for your customers, your consumers to contact you, and in turn they expect far more around the sort of customer service levels that they're expecting from yourself. And they want a personalized view. It's a know me expectation. Now, there may be some slight delay in the way in which the slides build here, which I'll just apologise for now. But personal is very important to customers. Customers don't think in terms of channels. We're all customers, consumers, and we're all human beings. So we think in terms of context. Know me, work with me, and support me. So moving on to the next slide. For contact centres vested in customer experience, your first chance to satisfy is your best chance to satisfy. Within the contact center space, resolving a customer's needs with the first contact, so first contact resolution as we know it, is widely accepted as one of the most important measures of success. And it has a powerful positive effect on both financial and performance metrics. Not only does first contact resolution reduce cost and increase service levels by cutting down on the number of customer contacts, it's also one of the primary drivers, I guess, for improved customer satisfaction. It also increases retention and higher revenues. Achieving ideal customer outcomes is the result of getting the balance right, we think, between all of the elements associated with customer interactions in your contact center, irrespective of how the customer contacted you. Some of the common factors that influence customer repeat calls, I mean, I think we're all familiar with, but agent competency levels, so skill levels, so there is an impact on quality management there, on how your agents are managing the calls. Systematic issues such as the technology we're using, IVRs, telephony, etc. We know that sometimes that can fail. Process issues. It's not just about the contact center here, and I'll delve in that in more detail. Unpredicted or predicted product, service, or event issues. We've all heard of various issues that can happen within or outside of the contact center that can have a direct result on your consumers and customers calling you. And all of these can be improved or removed by the use of speech analytics. Okay, so we know that contact center are a rich source of data. We know that looking back in time, we have this huge and vast array of information, of voice calls that typically we've just stored somewhere through compliance, through governance. So organizations have access to massive amounts of information, which, let's face it, if used effectively in the way in which we engage with customers, can enable those organizations to achieve important strategic objectives, and also and just as importantly, be dynamic with the way in which they structure their operation and it affects change within their organization. As you'd expect, traditional metrics such as call volumes, quality programs, service levels, and average handle time can provide useful insights into, I guess, what's going on in your contact center. And I hope some of the points we've put on the screen are familiar considerations in your day-to-day operation. But speech analytics isn't exclusive to the contact center. we already know the impact to organizations based on performance of agents and contact center, but there's also a wealth of other great intelligence trapped inside these conversations that can be utilized elsewhere in the business. Speech analytics can notify you of pretty much anything, really, but out of the norm of what's happening in your business. It gives you simple visualization of what's going on. It enables you to discover root cause, and by sampling up to 100% of those calls that are stored, you can just about find out about anything that your customer has experienced when they contact you. And again, most importantly, it enables you to do something about it. So that's some of the sort of positioning from me as to the importance of customer service and where speech analytics can assist organizations in driving that. So I'll hand over back to Frank now, who, as I say, will delve a little bit deeper into the technology itself.
Thank you, Richard. Just building on that theme of Richard talked there about the wealth of data locked within these customer interactions, locked within the audio that never sees the light of the day. I was talking to our CTO a while back about data and how much data is in audio conversations. He gave me an interesting fact. He said that within our hosted, our software can be consumed on either hosted or on-premise, but within our hosted environment, on a daily basis, we process more data than is held in all of the tweets sent annually last year. So and that amazed me. It just gives you an idea of the sort of scale, the amount of data that is locked within these conversations. And really, speech analytics, to simplify this, is at its core, it's about unlocking all of that unstructured data that's contained in those customer interactions, making it structured and, more importantly, consumable for the organization. In simple terms, turn all that data into actionable insight. And what I want to spend is a couple of minutes just explaining to you how we do that. So I'm going to talk you through the solution in 5 minutes. So going from left to right, the very first thing we do is ingest the audio into the platform, along with the associated metadata. Now, metadata, the agent, the team, the product, the location, etc. Metadata is really important because metadata allows you to analyze against any attribute contained in the metadata. My technical people say, the more metadata we get, the better. They love metadata. So metadata, a really important fact. And the other thing is, while we're going to talk about audio, it doesn't need to be audio. Any textual source, such as web chat, email, social, the same principles and analytics will apply. But let's concentrate on audio for a moment. So having ingested the audio and the metadata, the first thing we do is we apply some audio measures. We'll measure agitation, tempo, how fast or slowly people are exchanging words, and silence, because these are useful indicators of the context, useful indicators of the customer experience. If things are being said too quickly or too slowly, it can add time and friction into the customer experience. If emotions are heightened, it can indicate problems. And excessive silence can just highlight issues with the interaction. So, having ingested the audio and the metadata, we transcribe the audio. And we do this using highly accurate speech-to-text transcription technology. This gives us a really accurate, full transcription of the conversation. In this case, it's stereo. You can see the agent and the consumer's dialogue separated. And, people often ask me about, how good is audio transcription. In simple terms, the better the quality of the audio, the better the transcription will be. And we've all seen the advances in things like Alexa and Echo, et cetera, the speech-to-text and voice recognition technology has moved on at a pace in the last few years. So with reasonable quality audio, you will get good quality transcriptions that you can then apply analysis against. The next thing we do is we apply what we call categories to that transcription. A category is really the presence or the absence of an event. Here on this one, we're looking at things like greeting or empathy, dissatisfaction. These categories can be built to reflect anything you want them to be and make them relevant to your organization. And the tool that we provide is intuitive, so you can build your own categories. Although we also do provide a wealth of out-of-the-box categories to get you started and reduce that time to value. These category hits are taken to produce scores. Individual categories, or even a combination of categories, with user-defined precedence or relevance, are combined into a scorecard for that call. So here we're showing an agent quality score, and it's made up of empathy, ownership, and silence, and a CSAT score made up of other category scores. We're doing this for each and every call, so you'll get an holistic, an objective, and a consistent understanding of what's really happening on these interactions. And you can then use that insight to provide agent coaching, to identify process issues, understand complaints drivers, understand call drivers, really get a deep understanding of the behaviors and the interactions that are going to lead to ideal outcomes for your organization and for your consumers. You'll be making decisions for your organization based on this insight into all your interactions, and not just what we see typically in QA environments, a small percentage of them. The other thing that I probably should have mentioned on the previous slide, when we ingest the audio into our environment, one of the things we also do is we redact the audio for sensitive PCI information. So you've got a full PCI redacted transcript that we make the analysis against. So, how can we use this technology to help with customer experience? The first thing is you can measure if customer expectations are being met through analysing and scoring the calls. Different touch points to the contact centre have different expectations. For example, on a service call, the consumers expect first contact resolution. They expect their query will be handled efficiently to respect their time. They expect confidence in the results and politeness and courtesy from the agent who's dealing with them. These expectations are combined into scores. In this example, efficiency, handle time, CSAT, and silence measures. Whereas for a call involving a financial transaction, you may want to measure compliance, consent, politeness, and empathy. The key is measuring customer expectations are being met for all the calls and identifying and resolving the issues when they're not. Which brings us to number 2, establishing quick and holistic feedback to the agents to improve coaching. You don't need to wait until the end of the month or the next QA sample to assess and coach agents. Every call for every agent is being analysed. The data for today's calls will be available for the start of the shift tomorrow. Individual agent scorecards will show you clearly where the agent excels, and where there's room for improvement. This allows you to provide personalized, effective, and timely feedback to measure, and also to measure in really short time, the effect of that coaching on the scorecards for the agent performance. The power of feedback based on all of the agent's calls means you're providing clarity and accuracy and takes away that subjectivity or the doubt that you may have about what the 99% of calls you may not have assessed actually looked like. Richard mentioned about multi-channel. Now, many agents these days are multi-channel, and customer contact choices are wide and varied. Fact of life is that not every agent is suitable or performs optimally on each and every channel. So tip number 3 would be to use analytics to define where the agents really shine and place them on the channels that they and the customers will get the best experience. Feed that competency information into your scheduling or your workforce management system and get more effective interactions and happier agents and customers. We see a lot these days of customer journeys. There's almost, my LinkedIn feed and my social feeds and my email feeds are full of stuff about customer journeys. But what is the optimal customer journey? I would say it's one that leads to the right outcome for both the customer and the organization. It's not necessarily the shortest interaction or the journey with the least process or channel touch points. So tip 4 is to use analytics to define the optimal customer journey, identify where the pinch points are, and use that to guide your systems and processes. For example, is a step really necessary? Does the absence of a step lead to a less desirable outcome? Should the agent spend more or less time dealing with features and benefits and handling objections? Are there certain call types, channels, or drivers in that process that require special attention? Hopefully, by now, in my short conversation, you appreciate that there's a massive amount of data locked in the customer interactions, and it is of huge value to the organization. So my CX number 5 is don't let that data sit on a shelf. Use speech analytics technology to structure that data for you, to consume it as actionable insight. In doing that, you can improve your people through effective, targeted, analytic agent coaching, your processes to understand what's really happening and where the issues may be in your customer engagements, your products by gathering competitive information, intelligence, and call driver type information, and in improving your people, your products, and your processes using analytics, you will absolutely be able to improve the customer experience. The technology exists. It's available today through Aspect and CallMiner. I'll hand you back to Richard now, who will summarize and close the main presentation, and I look forward to talking to everybody again in the Q&A. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Frank. So Frank's given us an insight into the sort of technology itself. But interesting stats here from, again, Aberdeen Research around some of the benefits that organizations that have deployed the technology. And interestingly, just as an aside, in the latest UK Contact Center Decision Makers Guide from Babel, of the medium-sized organizations surveyed, only 11% had implemented a speech analytics solution, and 46% had no plans to. And I find, given that, as I mentioned in my introduction, my sort of 6 years of involvement and experience in the speech analytics space, I find that quite significant. And I think there are reasons why, which we can sort of discuss perhaps in the Q&A later. But when you look at some of the, some of the, benefits here on this slide from the Aberdeen Research Organisation, it makes it pretty compelling. And I think the justification, business justification as to why organisations, if aren't already considering the deployment of speech analytics, should be. I think this is, as I say, this is pretty compelling stuff. So here again, and again, coming on to it, this isn't just anecdotal. These are some of the real results that and return on investment that organisations have experienced and witnessed by analysing 100% of the customer interactions. And again, each will have its own relevance to various organisations, and each to perhaps a specific vertical market that the operation may sit in. But I think again, hopefully, I would like to think that they will touch, or at least be something that is of importance to most of your operations that you're working in there. And I mean, just focusing on two metrics in particular, reducing average call time. Well, that in itself could have a significant, cost saving to the business. Brand loyalty improved by circa 7%, 7.6% as we've got here. Once again, in a world, in a competitive environment where consumers show little loyalty, that could be a significant improvement in, perhaps around your net promoter score, or the likelihood that one of your customers will actually refer you to one of their peers, or in a particular customer satisfaction survey. So moving on to and just sort of closing now. So I mentioned earlier that. There is a danger that organisations trying to achieve too much with speech analytics. But if we take something as compelling as, or something as fundamental as perhaps first contact resolution, which again, in my experience, is something that most contact centres are striving to realise and improve on. A recent study of the carried out by the International Customer Management Institution, the ICMI, showed that only 51.2% of centres measure first call resolution for phone calls, but that are handled by a live agent. So only half are actually know, what or why their callers are potentially calling again. So again, a typical major bone of potential frustration. And the reason why first call resolution data often doesn't get captured or gets captured incorrectly is that traditionally it's been a very difficult metric to track. One solution, obviously, as we're here today to improve that, is speech or contact analytics, which can, as we say, analyse every single contact. But this is just one of many potential benefits by deploying and implementing a speech analytics solution. And while many businesses initially implement customer interaction analytics to solve a specific problem, it's fair to say that once embedded in an organisation, it can often encourage a sort of more strategic approach and a sort of broader use of the technology later on. And if I look at the sort of three pillars of why organisations would consider speech analytics solution, I've broken them down to sort of three main areas: performance and quality, improvement and process change, voice of the customer and marketing applications, things like process and compliance on the performance side, where you can monitor up to 100% of calls to check that specific words or phrases are included, and this, or avoided by advisors. It's a very powerful and compelling, proposition. I'm conscious that I'm sort of rambling on and talking quite a bit, and I'm aware that we need to, or I'd like to move on to questions. So if I now hand back over to Brian to manage the Q&A. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. And we have had some questions pour in, and so I think this first one, Frank, maybe we'll have you, since this is a question that was rendered while you were explaining how the speech analytics works, was you mentioned that among the acoustic measurements is silence. does the analytics identify just the total amount of silence on the call? Could you just go into a little bit more detail when you say it measures silence? How does it do that, and what does that look like?
Sure. Silence is simply the measurement of dead air. In any human interaction, there is going to be silence. The human brain has to process what the other party is saying, message received, understood, and respond. So you'd expect, a degree of silence to be the norm in any interaction. However, what you do see is that where there are long blocks of silence. So let's say, for example, in a particular organization, we'd expect to see 25% silence as the norm. You then look at certain interactions, certain products or processes that are mentioned, or certain agents or teams have 40 or 50% silence. That is invariably going to point to the fact that there is a challenge within. It could be training or coaching or availability of information to the agent to deal with that query. So silence can be an absolute, a cost. It's the cost of dead air, but also adds a lot of friction into the customer experience. So if you can identify where these long blocks of silence are occurring that contribute to an overall silence measure above the average, and then take action, because as I said earlier, speech analytics provides actionable insight. There needs to be an effective link in order to take action against the insight that's provided. But if you can take the action, not only will you drive cost out of the organization in terms of the cost to serve, you'll also drive a lot of friction out of the customer experience. So we measure as a norm the overall silence, and we measure the longest blocks of silence to come up with the average silence call. And it's where these long blocks of silence are present that it's almost invariably going to be point to an agent coaching or training opportunity, or a problem with access to information or knowledge so the agent can effectively serve the consumer.
Okay, great. Thank you. Richard, on this particular one, with automated speech analytics, would you ever need to listen to a call manually anymore?
In my experience, Brian, it's I think there are some organisations who still will listen to calls manually as part of a sort of quality and training process, but really no. The technology is there to remove that from the sort of daily quality practice. So, for all intents and purposes, no, I don't think you really do need to listen to it manually, but I'm aware of some organisations having that more sort of, that sort of more personal approach. But really, again, it's a belt and braces approach, and not really something that organisations would do as part of a sort of formal quality process moving forward. The technology is there.
So Richard, I don't know whether it's vogue for presenters perhaps to disagree with each other, but I would say it depends. My answer to that question would be it depends. Speech analytics is able to measure the absence, presence, sequence, etc. of the linguistic elements of a scorecard. Now, if your scorecard is heavily compliance-oriented or heavily script-based, where you expect certain things to be said in a certain sequence, and it's black and white, absolutely you wouldn't need to listen to the calls because the analytics takes care of it. Where you have non-linguistic measures within the scorecard, for example, did the agent present the values and virtues of our organization throughout this interaction? That is not a linguistic thing necessarily. So it depends. I would say that analytics at its core from a QA perspective will allow you to reduce the numbers of people that you have necessary to listen to calls, And you can use all of that time and effort that you save to put back in to targeted and focused coaching of the agents. So my answer would be, it depends. You will almost certainly benefit through having a reduced team of people that have to listen to calls, and you have a far more productive and efficient quality management organization. But most importantly, the information that you are feeding back to the agent isn't based on 1, 2, 3, 5% of the calls. It's based on 100% of their calls. So the need to aggregate, the need to deal with, oh, you always pick my worst calls. My other 99% of calls were perfect. Why do you favor Frank over Richard? Life is so unfair. You take away all of that subjectivity and you've got a really good consistency as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Frank, maybe I'll ask you this one. How do you measure customer sentiment? Is it just in what's said? Is it? How do you go about doing that?
I think that there's a number of different ways that you can measure. Cause yeah, you can do it with what's said. You know, you can have categories for, you know, let's say take something like dissatisfaction, for example. Someone says, that's okay. You know, that may be a low level of dissatisfaction. Someone says, I'm really not happy, I want to speak to your supervisor. That's a much higher level of dissatisfaction. If you combine that with some of the acoustic measures, like we mentioned about agitation, you know, the volumetric measures of voices being raised or lowered within the call, and you know, you combine, and then you add in things like empathy and whether, you know, if someone is dissatisfied, you'd expect the agent to perhaps be saying something like, I'm sorry about that, you know, let me take care of that for you. And in the absence of empathy with dissatisfaction, you can see that the customer emotion driver getting higher and higher within the call because they get more agitated. So it's a combination, I think, Brian, of both what's being said, the context in how it's being said, the way that the agent is dealing with the drivers that are leading to heightened state of emotion. So it really is a combination of that and volumetric measures. There's no, you know, I quite often get asked about, you know, sentiment analysis, and, you know, sarcasm would be a good example. You know, sarcasm is hard to measure linguistically, because someone's saying, oh, that sounds great, but they're doing so in a sarcastic manner. You know, so you need to be able to also, you know, in that particular case, in sarcasm, for example, sarcasm is present in very, very, very small fraction of percentage of calls that you would see. So I would much more prefer to think about emotion as being a combination of the linguistic things that are being said on the call, the context in which they're being said on the call, and the agent responses to that context.
Okay, great. Perfect. So one of the things that Richard had mentioned, and I'll let either of you speak to this, but you were talking about first call resolution and the importance of first call resolution. How do you, within speech analytics, how do you measure or detect if a caller is a repeat caller?
I'll try and deal with that one. So this is where I think the metadata becomes, you know, really important, because the metadata could have things like, you know, the caller's account number or the caller's calling line identification. So you'll be able to see from the metadata that this is a repeat call. You know, this is Frank again, and Frank called 2 days ago. And, you know, so the metadata is how you would see repeat calls. And one of the beauties of having a solution that brings email and chat and social and audio together is that in one place you can see whether or not, you know, this is not just a repeat caller, on the same channel, but this consumer has interacted with the organization on different channels as part of their journey. And you can apply measures such as, let's say we had a customer experience a category and measure. You can measure the experience across the channels and across the journey. So metadata is probably the key attribute, Brian. If you've got some unique identifier in the metadata, you can absolutely see whether or not this is a repeat caller or not.
Mm-hmm. So a combination of metadata, and if in fact the caller indicated that there had been multiple. So likely you would have a category built that would be a reflection of repeat caller indicators.
Yeah, I mean,
Gotcha.
we had a client of ours that wanted to know simply, going one step, why are people calling us in the first place? Because, they've invested a lot of time and effort onto the website, they've invested a lot of time and effort onto mobile applications, they're promotional to try and, get people onto web chat and, IVR, sort of lower the cost to serve, but they're still getting a lot of calls into the contact center. And within the first 30 seconds, you can identify things like, why are people calling? Because people will say, hey, I was just on the website trying to make a payment. That is immediately an indication of it's a payment call driver and potentially, issues with the website being able to make payments. So you can take all of that insight and information and feed it back down the process to help the organization to be more effective in serving the consumers.
And Brian and Frank, that's one of those improvement and process change, I guess elements that I was mentioning earlier. And in fact, just developing on Frank's example there, I have a building society customer who, as part of their one of their processes, as you say, interactions a lot on the web, they're steering people. And there's a breakdown in their process. They're steering people back towards the contact center, which the contact center, management team weren't aware of. So they were able to identify again through a frequent use of common language on the in the speech recordings, the fact that I was steered towards the contact center by the website, and hence they were able to change and improve their process accordingly.
Yeah, so a perfect example of something outside of just agent performance, being able to improve something systematically or process-wise that will help ultimately improve efficiency and expedite customer satisfaction.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
correct.
Great.
And it's one of the key things on. We Richard talked about the sort of ROI and percentage gained across different criteria. One of the big ROIs on speech analytics is actually reducing inbound call volume, or reducing call volume in its totality, because the agent is the most expensive way of servicing a customer. Human assistance is more expensive than any other way, and so it's quite surprising to some people when we say, one of the key return on investments is actually to reduce the amount of calls, but it's absolutely borne out in various case studies and in real life that we've done. Is helping customers to reduce the cost of the contact center, reduce the cost to serve, and that goes hand in hand with other cost-saving return on investments that you can get with speech analytics. We've already touched on it in quite a bit of detail around the quality assurance function, for example. There's huge amounts of savings and benefits to be gained from speech analytics within the quality assurance function as well.
Perfect. In fact, that was a question. So, Frank, you answered it without me having to even ask it. That was lovely.
I must read the Q&A box then, Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, that might be it. So, final question, gentlemen. And Richard, you spoke to this earlier in your presentation when you were talking about the variety of insights and all of that data that's coming into your contact centers. If an organization is using speech analytics and you're getting all of these insights firsthand, does this eliminate or reduce the need for post-event surveys?
I would say that maybe I should jump in there. I mean, no.
Yeah.
I don't think it does. What you can do, though, I think you can enhance the richness of that feedback that you're getting within the survey. So if you think about a survey being a voice of the customer, if you can combine what's happening on the surveys, what your customers tell you on your surveys, with what's happening on the interactions, think about the concept of then you've got the voice of the contact center. You've really got the ability to know not just what customers are saying on the surveys, but to use the insight from analytics to understand the context and the insight into why they are saying what they're saying. Because in a text message type survey, or a survey where you leave 1 minute of verbatim comments, you don't capture all that clarity and that richness of information. So I would say, continue to survey the customers if that's what you want, if that's what your organization does, but combine the surveys with the analytics to really get true, rich insight into why customers are saying what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. Almost like using the... Go ahead, Richard. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was going to say complementary as opposed to usage exclusively. So I think, as Frank says, you should be able to use the the insight that you have to enhance the quality of the feedback that you're looking for.
Right, right. Well, yeah, exactly. So, in other words, you're taking the insights that you're driving and then being able to better refine the survey questions, because you've got that evidence now that might support a greater detail, and that's the beauty of a survey, right? Is the ability to ask very pointed, specific questions.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Fantastic.
Brian, there was a few more questions in the chat window. We've got another couple of minutes. There's a couple of questions I've noticed in the chat window that we haven't covered.
Let's see.
There's one. How does the system know if the agent got the answer right? I mean, that can be really it's an attribute of metadata. If you think about let's say it's a call where you're calling your energy company and the call is to change your tariff, for example. Analytics will absolutely pick up the fact this is a tariff change call, and therefore, what the action on the agent should have been either to accept the tariff change, apply that to the CRM system, or to reject the tariff change and give the customer the reasons why it wasn't appropriate, and also reflect that onto the system of record. So what you can do is you can take metadata, not just from the contact center, but from these external sources, such as the CRM system. So you can actually look at the dispositioning of the call to see if that dispositioning was the right dispositioning for this call type. That would be one of the simplest ways of being able to verify that the agent did the right thing. Analytics will detect what the thing was and what the action should have been. The CRM system will be, the system of record will reflect whether or not that action was actually taken.
Right. That's great. There's another question here too. What are some of the top industries currently using speech analytics?
It's becoming more and more varied in terms of the top industries. I can certainly reflect on some of our verticals where we've seen the most use and adoption of speech analytics. But it's any organization that interacts with consumers on any channel. The top industries from our perspective would be financial services, would be technology companies, would be energy and water companies, and we're seeing more and more now in terms of the digital government type organizations, more and more sort of things coming into us from the government. But people, I think, have a misconception that speech analytics is for the domain of really large organizations. We've got clients with probably 30 seats or less in their contact center that are getting real benefits from speech analytics in a very niche vertical. And then we've got organizations that have got thousands of agents in financial services or energy, getting the similar benefits at a different scale. So, I would say don't be put off by either your size of contact center or your vertical. If you want to unlock the insight and improve your performance, differentiate yourself from the competition, and get happier agents and customers, speak to your representatives in Aspect, and we'd be happy to engage with you.
Great.
And one thing I didn't mention earlier that I've seen in the chat window, someone asked a question about, is this solution suitable for text analytics and not just speech? Absolutely. One of the things that we do is on audio, as I explained, we transcribe the audio to text. So the actual analytics magic is done against a textual source. So any textual source, be it web chat or text messaging or email or social media, is treated in exactly the same way as speech. So if you've got a web chat only contact center, can you use analytics? Of course you can. It's the same solution.
And Frank, just to add on to that, in slide in your customer experience point number 4, not only are you able to measure other forms, again, text analytics, SMS, survey, chat, email, but you can link all of that together as a journey. So you're not only able to detect what's transpiring on each of those different types of interactions, but link and reveal the insights specific to outcomes and activity associated with each of those calls. So it really helps to give you the broader picture, if you will, and helps to lead to plotting and mapping the ideal customer outcomes, both in terms of the agent behaviors as well as the channels that best support your particular contact center objectives.
Too right,
okay.
Brian. It's good to have a compare, Brian, that adds such significant value. So thanks for helping with the questions.
Thanks, Brian.
It was my pleasure. So I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. And we appreciate your time and your attention. And as Frank mentioned earlier, certainly apologies again for the technical errors that we experienced on Thursday. As I mentioned before, this webinar is being recorded, and both the slides and the webinar recordings will be available at the Aspect website within 48 hours of this broadcast. For additional information, we would really encourage you to explore the Aspect website. And in fact, one of their recent publications that just came out is the 10 best practices to getting the most from your speech analytics. And again, I would encourage you to go to their website, engage with Richard and his associates, and learn how you can optimize your organization's customer experience and outcomes through the use of speech analytics technology. So we want to thank you one and all for attending today. We wish you a most joyous holidays and a happy new year, and look forward to our next opportunity to speak with you again. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Richard and Frank, you can hang on if you want.